Hello and welcome. Thank you all for being here today. I'm Nick Kanoki, Director of Technology for the Asset Leadership Network, and I'm excited today for a conversation with Jim Dieter, ALN CEO. And I'm also noticing as I'm looking at this slide, the date is wrong. Please ignore that. It is April 4th. Don't be confused. And now, before we get into the program, just want to thank our patron members, Jacobs, Mantech, Onuma, ABS Quality Evaluations, and CGI, as well as all our organizational members. And again, if you're out there wondering how we could work together, please reach out. We would love to talk to you and figure out how we can be of assistance to your mission. And with that, we'll say upcoming events on April 28th, we have a ALN Airport Asset Leadership Board at this time, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And the program's called Digital Transformation, the Art of the Possible. We have a few speakers, but certainly will be in attendance are Jennifer Mims and Brian Oldham, the board co-chairs. And Mike's not here today, so stay tuned for next week, and he'll give you more recent rundown of what that event will actually entail. And now, if you're out there watching, I'll just say we'd love to hear from you. So please send any comments, questions, or feedback to the chat. You can also use the Q&A function to send any questions for Jim or myself. And with that, Jim Dieter, welcome. Thanks for being here today.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. That's good.
Of course, yeah. I feel like the roles have been reversed somewhat in a way with me interviewing you after all these years here. But good to be back in this capacity, and I was hoping that, I know you've gone on the record and talked about your career before, but I was hoping that you might, give us a short story version of kind of how you got here and where all you went and how you returned, and if there's any thread that ties it all together. So
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. 50 years in 30 seconds. Okay. We'll go for that.
30 seconds would be quite brief, so you can take a little more time, a little more of our time than that, I would say.
Yeah, no, good. Uh, I was doing retail work, and I had done a number of different jobs in my late 20s and early 30s. Ran hardware stores and general stores and building supply centers and stuff like that. So I got a lot of varied experience, but I really wasn't living up to my capabilities. Maybe that's what a parental person would say. Anyhow, uh, plus I had to work weekends. That's awful. So I started looking for a job, and I answered an ad in the help wanted section of the Washington Post. It was a pretty big ad, so I guess they were serious, but it was with a company I'd never heard of called SAIC. Never worked for government contractors, really didn't know anything about them. But it was for a government property administrator. So, did some research and looked it up. My sister had worked for the government actually at the Naval Depot up in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. So she gave me a little background on what it might be like. And yeah, got the job. Go figure, because my experience with computer systems and inventory management, managing others and stuff, meshed with the job. And that was great. SAIC, an employee-owned company, at least at that time. But I don't think they are anymore. And that was really good. And their headquarters was in La Jolla, California. So I got to go to La Jolla for 2 weeks in the summer and 2 weeks in the winter to work with my boss. I was like, well, that's tough duty there. That was good.
And your job there was property administrator?
Yeah, as many, but not all of our people that attend our things understand this. Within the US government, the word property is used typically rather than the word asset. all based on the Government Property Act of 1948. But although there are distinctions, property, as we use it, is really interchangeable with asset. Asset's a thing that has value, and property is a thing you own or that someone owns. But in terms of that diagram, it would look just the same. So I started working on property management systems. This is like 1985 or something. Got involved in the National Property Management Association, or NPMA. I'm still a member after however many years that is. I think it's 40 something. Anyhow, met a lot of really excellent people, and I went on from there. Got involved in contracts work for a while, but I really didn't want to be a contracts person. I wanted to be, an asset management guy. So, went on from there to work for other government contractors, CSC at that time, which is now merged with another company, and then Honeywell, and then Northrop Grumman. So doing, it's largely about assets that are owned by the government, provided the government contractor. And they're, not always, but typically movable property assets rather than infrastructure or assets or things that, like real property or bridges. Sometimes we track that sort of stuff. But I got a lot of really interesting and amazing experience. And got to go to NASA bases and Army bases and Air Force bases all over the country. Got involved in standards, helped start ASTM E53 in 2000 with several other people, which really led to, I guess it was all building blocks to getting involved in the ISO 55000 effort and starting the ALN and all that stuff.
Well, thanks for that, fairly brief, and I've got some follow-up questions so we can dig in a little more.
Sure.
Specifically, you mentioned kind of not wanting to be a contractor to some degree.
Contract, a role in government contractor organizations is a contract manager or contract representative. So they're
Gotcha.
people that negotiate, respond to requests for proposals, RFPs, and then manage the legal documents associated with contractors work with the government. That was interesting. Dealt with applied physics lab, and I worked on contracts just by myself that were worth, tens of millions of dollars, and as part of teams that worked on contract worth, billions of dollars. It's interesting. Learned how to read a contract, which is handy.
But, you said, nah, I want to be an asset manager, right?
Yeah, well, as what I came to see was the people in leadership roles in contract management were lawyers or, had advanced degrees, which I did not have. And it was an established profession where property management and asset management, was a nascent profession. Seemed to provide more opportunity. And I think that has played out in terms of being interesting. Was it the best decision financially? I don't know. I couldn't say that. Maybe not. Contracts people work long hours too. It's crazy.
And so you ended up, going a few different places from there, but you said ultimately maybe all culminating in the work with ISO.
Yeah, I left out when I got done working with Northrop Grumman. And typically, like I'm a builder, not a maintenance person, or not a maintainer. Maintenance person is the wrong word. So each place I went, when they hire somebody like me, with the experience I had and developed, it usually means something went wrong. So, uh, but then what happens is after you fix it, which takes 3 to 7 years typically, uh, then all of a sudden you don't get the same resources that you used to before, and it's time to move on to the next place, which turned out to be, a good way for me to go. But then after I worked for Northrop, I worked for Sunflower Systems, which is, uh, many people on these calls know about that. It's very big in the government property world with federal agencies and with government contractors. So that was a really good learning experience too, getting involved in marketing and implementation of software systems. It's a really good thing to know about.
Yeah, it seems like that's something that keeps coming back as kind of a criteria for a good asset manager is an understanding of systems. And these days it's a lot of digital systems and how to learn about them, work with them, customize them, share them with others. That seems very key.
Yeah, yeah. It was funny. I was met with a group of people yesterday for a wine tasting out here in the Shenandoah Valley where I live, which is quite fun.
Lovely.
The people got in a conversation about travel, and there's particularly they're talking about traveling in the UK.
Hmm.
And I'm sitting there listening to it. I'm going like, wow, I've been to the UK a bunch of times because when I started just being a consultant, I worked for uh, a consulting company based, in the UK. So uh, I took lots of trips here, but my view of the world was either going to a convention or going to London for a meeting. And I'd have maybe a day where I did something, but I never just went and traveled around England. So I've, gotten to go there a lot, but it was fun.
Nice. I yeah, have you worked much in Australia? The UK, Australia, those are some of the big names we think of in asset management. People that are almost like, could be seen as a big brother to the US, someone
Yeah.
to look up to and follow their lead.
Yeah. Well, the company in the UK I worked with also had a Australian office, but I couldn't claim to work directly with them, some marginal involvement. But I did get to go twice to Australia um, to speak at conferences and other work there. Uh, it's a long way to Australia. It's, it's a
I
long. Like you've been to New Zealand, right? So you know how long that flight is. God, it
was
goes
gonna
forever.
say I can attest to how far away it is. But my line of questioning around the international stuff is kind of getting to culture ultimately. And, I've always wondered, why is it that Australia and the UK, why is it that there are places and organizations or, environments where asset management is more mature? And I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that or.
I think the Australian example is as I understand it how it got started. Some others might have better words, but I think is really interesting in that it started out as in an engineering body. It was an engineering body in Australia, and they got started on asset management through efforts of Penny Burns and Peter Kohler and many others. Uh, and they had one of their, a convention or a meeting, they got together, and the prime minister of the country showed up. So that was amazing exposure. And, it wasn't too much longer before there was a national requirement to have asset management plans on government related work. And well, that'll get people started right away. That's how I got involved in ISO standards, management system standards originally is when I worked for for Honeywell, they NASA was going to award a big kind of omnibus contract, base support contract that we were going to bid on. And they said, we need to have an ISO quality system within 6 months of winning the contract. So everybody started doing ISO quality systems. And I was fortunate that my boss nominated me to the configuration control board, I think they called it, but it was sort of the managing group for the whole effort. So I learned a ton. And once you know one ISO management system standard is really, they're very, very much aligned. One of the things people don't realize about 55001 is that most of the text in that is prescribed text, and it's prescribed by the quality people. And it's really quality language around documentation and other aspects of a quality system. So if you already have a 9000 system, the additional work to get to an asset management system is greatly mitigated. And a version I did for my consulting work, there's really only there's under 30 statements out of all the shall statements that are specifically to asset management. They're all about quality or information management, which are hugely important, don't get me wrong, but the management system approach is to push the quality requirements into each of the standards rather than say, you need to get the quality system first and then do the other stuff. And there's always debate about that. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's an interesting point that, looking at the asset management, ISO standard, it looks almost similar to some of the it doesn't have a ton of asset management specific stuff in there. And it occurs to me to say here, we talk a lot about asset management, but generally preface it by saying, and we're not talking about managing assets, we're almost getting more to the system level, more to the culture level. And, you were talking about the quality and the process management as well. Say
Well,
more.
that's one of my pet things, and we could go on talking about it forever, but nobody outside of, dyed in the wool asset management people begin to understand the difference between asset management and managing assets. And it doesn't translate to other languages at all. If you don't understand the concept in English, there's really no way to explain it. And I think and I fear that as the revised documents come out, there's been more and more emphasis on the managing assets, or rather than the value. The standard is all about the value and managing the value. So it's really an executive sort of an exercise, not a physical inventory maintenance exercise. Again, not that those aren't usually important, but we know how to do those things. I mean, it's just, Terry O'Hanlon's group in Florida and others, SMRP, et cetera, do a great job on maintenance. There's lots of good information on IT systems, et cetera. But, the really breakthrough concept of the standards from 2014 was that the definition of assets is something from which you derive value. So back to the property comment, it very much, to me, says it doesn't matter whether you own it or not. Like, if you rent a car, or if you buy a car, or if you borrow a car, or if you steal a car, it's all still an asset to you in the time that you're using it.
Has value.
Well,
Well, so it sounded like you were almost, feeling a little cautious about the new asset management standard, and I was wondering if you might, in light of that, what are people standards aren't everything, they're useful, but maybe there's a maybe there's an end to their usefulness or, but they can't take you all the way to where you want to go.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to think about and unwrap in that. And anybody that gets involved, I saw Chris Gawley was on the call. I'm sure he would say the same thing. When you're really involved in the sausage making of writing the standard, it's hard not to feel alienated from the process, or other than totally happy with where it is. That's that's just part of the game, because it's a game of compromise, a process of compromise. Don't get me wrong, when the documents came out in 2014, it was clear to me that this was the best document on asset management that had ever been written. For the revision, which will be out sometime this year, I had aspirations to really take it another level. And it's improved, but I don't think we've taken it another level. Maybe that's a good way to say it.
Fair enough. Well, and so, kind of as we're getting towards the end of this program, I'm wondering what's the direction you'd like to see standards or the field of asset management go, that, maybe we're not at yet, or, maybe Australia's there, but the US is lagging, or, where should we aim for? And maybe this is unrelated and a different question entirely, but and is that why you got into the standards writing process, that you felt like they had an ability to direct, the movement or the field in a good way?
Yeah. Well, the writing part of it, we started with the ASTM Committee 53. And I've written like 7 or 8 and been involved in numerous other uh, more focused asset management standards. So it became familiar, and you and I have had some conversations about that, about working on an asset leadership standard, which is another topic, but I won't go down that rabbit hole right now. But it's interesting. So from an ALN perspective, from the beginning and from the title, asset leadership, the idea was to get that senior level perspective. A lot of times, asset management professionals and organizations are locked in middle management and have a hard time getting heard. And we wanted to appeal to senior decision makers in the federal government and in corporations, uh, and to talk about the value. Uh, where we're going, I think, is an interesting one, with maybe a good place to get to for some relevance for this, but with current events. But one of the concepts in the standards is stakeholder involvement. And I think everybody I've ever seen deal with it, it's like, yeah, we need to deal with those people out there. It's not really embraced, it's recognized, but and I think it's a sort of a trademark of capitalism, uh, that it's all about the company making money. It's not about making people feel good. And the controversy and discussion, how could it be a controversy about ESG these days, I think is right on the money. So, where I think we need to go, and to talk about is, and it's clear from a government perspective, that the value is the value to the constituents, whether that's at a city, county, state, or federal level. The value should be judged in terms of, the value, in terms of, the state or federal government preserving that beautiful landscape behind you, because that's an asset, right? Uh, I think there's a particularly interesting example with the bridge story in Baltimore. I mean, what an asset management story. So, the ship apparently didn't have a backup power system. And it's like, you have something that big and there's no backup system? I mean, it's like, I don't know anything about cargo ships, but it seems just, stunning to me that there's not enough to at least get you stopped, something. Uh, and then the asset management perspective of the bridge, where it was built for the needs of the day it was built, and not for huge cargo ships. So both the structure of the bridge that allowed the entire bridge to collapse from one accident, and the fact that there were not sufficient pilings to stop a ship from hitting the bridge in the first place, which kind of, then you get into well, we talk about maintenance and deferred maintenance, but this is kind of a step beyond that. It's like, are there, is our infrastructure fit for purpose in today's world? And I think the big story of the bridge was, it was not fit for purpose in today's world. If what is, what happened can happen, it's not fit for purpose. And then you think of it from an asset perspective, and the ship is privately owned. Okay. Now, if I was driving down the road in my car and I smashed a guardrail, the state would be after me to pay for the guardrail. I've not heard a word said that the shipping company should pay for the bridge. And then from there, of course, the bridge is an infrastructure asset of the state of, is it a federal asset? Or I guess it's a state asset, probably. Although the federal government's not going to pay for it, which would make a new one a federal asset. So you have the private industry aspect, and you have the infrastructure aspect of it coming together in a bad way. But so the impact is on the Port of Baltimore. Clearly, that bridge and the ship were assets to the Port of Baltimore. That's now being denied and could impact their viability in the future. Not to mention all the people that work there and the people that drive over the bridge every day. That bridge was an asset to everybody who drove over the bridge every day. So I think that broader view of assets and and the connection of privately owned assets and government owned assets is, I think, really interesting and fruitful places to have discussion about, and how it could and should be managed. And then how to get anybody to do anything about it, of course, is another entirely complex question.
Well, thanks for that, Jim, and thanks for bringing up current events. Really something that I'm sure everyone's heard of, and maybe some people feel strongly about. And to that point, we're not talking about this trying to backseat drive or point fingers necessarily. We're after it from the perspective of, for the constituents, for the people who that bridge was a huge value to, it's no longer. And what can we do as an asset management community to say, asset managers out there and city, state, federal level, look hard, make sure your systems are in good shape, and that you're turning a careful eye on those mission critical assets, and that they're, not being forgotten about or left antiquated, because it's not when, or if, it's when this will come back to bite you.
How long can you let it go without thinking about it until something bad happens? And then we're surprised when something bad happens. But when you look at the facts, that's just surface level. When you look at the surface level facts, clearly that never should have happened. It never should have.
Yep. Well, thanks so much for talking to me today, Jim. And if you want any closing words after I share a screen, happy to let you do that. But big thank you for today's program, and for your work as CEO here. Thanks for getting the ALN going and moving in the right direction that we're carrying on to this day. And thank you to our patron members, Jacobs, Mantech, Onuma, ABS Quality Evaluations, and CGI, for helping to fund the ALN to do programs like this, our newsletter, and our upcoming events. and all our organizational members. Thank you for making this possible. And we would love to expand this list, so please reach out if you're interested in working with the ALN. And hopefully we'll see you guys next week. Not sure who the guest is for ALN Thursday at 3, but I'm sure we'll have someone. And then in a few Thursdays away, we have this Airport Asset Leadership Board program on digital transformation and the art of the possible. With that, thank you to everyone out there. Jim, do you have any closing words?
Well, let me say that quickly, hopefully.
Yeah, no,
I
we're
think
in
this
overtime now. Take your time.
the bridge discussion is one that I think we can provide value going forward, because it's not just we need to fix a bridge, we need to not let this happen again,
Mhm.
and be able to see in other places where it could happen. So I think a role that the ALN could start to fill is to have an asset leadership and asset management discussion about such events when they happen, and provide input and documents to people working on these at the state, federal, company levels on what can be done to avoid such things in the future. So I think, I'll be sending something out perhaps in next week's newsletter about getting a little discussion group together, perhaps, open to everyone, perhaps not. We'll talk about it. But I don't know if Malak Marami was on today, but I know he has a background in bridges. And it's a ports issue, and it's a roads issue, et cetera. But we could have an interesting discussion on this, and perhaps provide some value to lawmakers, as we did through ASCE in regards to the infrastructure bills that are coming out, that asset management is a consideration, uh, and not something you only think about after the bridge goes down.
Well, that's a great idea, Jim. I really appreciate that we do these regular conversations, talking about important issues and sometimes current ones. And I really do think that our community has a lot of value to offer the nation and the world. And a lot of that value comes from, just good conversations with intelligent people on important topics. So thanks for sticking with us, everyone. And we hope to see you in the future and maybe next week. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it.
Have a happy Thursday. Bye for now.